issues. Thank you, Jess. We'll be recording this as well, so take note of that in terms of your camera and so on. Hi, my name's Said Ahmed. I'm the chair of Community Energy London. I'm being extremely ably assisted today by my colleague and project officer at Community Energy London, Jess Dunning. Jess, if you can give us a wave. Jess will making sure everything runs smoothly, hopefully today, and for what we have is a great lineup of speakers, practitioners, policymakers, and part of the system of the distribution network that works in London as well. Talking all about under the title we've given today of smarter energy communities, which I'll talk about in a second. We have four speakers today. We have Frank Gordon, who has joined us from the Renewable Energy Association, talking about some of the policy framework for where smart energy and flexibility has got to. We've got two practitioners, Pete Capener will be talking about from Bath and Wells Community Energy, talking about flex community. Have I got that right, Pete? What have I said? Flex community, is that right? Sorry, you're on mute there, Pete.
Yeah, no, that's right. Bath and West, yeah. Bath and Wells, the community energy.
Oh, I knew I got something wrong there. Thank you. Then Dr. Mary Gillie from Energy Local, who's been making a number of interesting projects over a fair few years, including reaching out into London as well, which will be very interesting to hear about. And then we have Lynne McDonald from UK Power Networks, and Lynne was there's a number of area of activities that UKPN are doing, from their future energy scenarios to their local area energy planning, to their latest business plan, to their interaction with community energy. So I've given Lynne a fairly, a free hand to talk about those issues, which are keeping the London's distribution network operator busy at the moment. Just to say, the reason why we organise this workshop, it's one of 3 workshops that we're doing, looking at technology pathways for community energy in London. The first of which was solar, and Jess will put a link in the chat column shortly on where the archive is for that solar meeting, which took two weeks ago or so. So we're looking at new market opportunities for community energy in solar. That was an excellent event. We had a number of speakers from the industry and and practitioners talking about not only where their solar project is, but what more they can do to interact with the local network to maximize the potential of their project. Today's one is about smarter energy communities and looking at how we can utilize that infrastructure to kind of work in the local area to make sure that the system is more efficient. And the third workshop is decarbonising heat with community energy, which is taking place later in this month. And Jess will drop that link in the chat column as well, if you'd like to register for that. Again, these series of workshops, which are funded by the Greater London Authority, are responding to the group's ambitions for developing bigger and bolder projects in the capital. We don't have the ability in London to deliver large solar farms, wind turbines, and so on. And so we can only do kind of modest schemes, but we can do many multiples of them. But increasingly, as we're seeing more and more infrastructure connect to the distribution network, which can contact and collaborate with one another, we're trying to make the groups understand how they can work with other partners to make sure, as I mentioned, we can make them more efficient and make the whole network more efficient and open up to a wider range of stakeholders in terms of the services they can provide. We've been working on issues like this for a couple of years now. Unfortunately, we don't see many London local authorities really grasping the whole issue of smart energy. As you're aware, the vast majority of London's 33 boroughs have signed climate emergency declarations. They've set out climate action plans. We undertook some research in 2021 looking at all those action plans, and the whole concept of how you bring this infrastructure into a smarter energy system doesn't feature in any significant way in their work at the moment. There are not that many smart energy projects led by local authorities or officers within London who have got some kind of remit to look at this. UKPN are doing some good work in trying to bring up the local area energy planning to interact with local authorities more, but there is still huge amounts of information asymmetry at the moment in between businesses and the network operator and the practitioners and local authorities who actually will be hosting an awful lot of this kit in this area. And that's something I think we'll probably reflect upon during today's discussion. I think I'll stop for the moment. We've got a fair amount of attendees already registered. Normal rules applies if you don't mind. If you could keep on mute whilst our speakers are presenting. Grateful also if you could possibly turn off your cameras while our speakers are speaking as well to reduce any distractions. We will have question and answer sessions after each speaker, and then a kind of round table at the very end. We're scheduled to finish at 12 p.m. I aim to make sure that we do that, and that's dependent on colleagues as well here in terms of their contributions and questions. Please feel free to use the chat column as well. I'll be chairing those Q&As and I'll be looking through the chat column as we go through the event. Okay, Jess, have I forgotten anything? That's probably I probably have forgotten something, but Jess is probably doing too many things at the same time to kind of answer that question meaningfully. Okay, whilst we remember what I've forgotten, we will move swiftly on and on time to our first speaker. I'm really pleased that we've got Frank Gordon here, Director of Policy from the Renewable Energy Association. He's been working in this area and also with community energy groups in the past for a number of years now. And Frank's kind of had his arm twisted to come along today to kind of speak about where some of the policy around this transition to a smarter energy system at the moment. Frank, over to you.
Great, thanks, Syed, and morning all. Yeah, working at REA, I have the privilege and the pleasure, like many of you on the call, I suspect, to work with Syed in one of his various hats. So thank you again to you, Syed, for the opportunity and the invitation today, and to you, Jess, for putting it all together as well. So yeah, so I'm Frank, Director of Policy at REA. We're a trade body, not-for-profit, serving the renewable energy and clean technology sector. We've got over 500 members in our trade body arm. We've got a separate arm called REAL, which has an extra few thousand installer companies and more kind of consumer-focused companies. Our vision, as you can see on this slide, is a future built on renewable energy and clean technology, bringing together a kind of coalition of the sector to promote renewables and clean technology. So if we move to the next slide, please. Just the kind of obligatory spiel to start off with. So we organise regular meetings, engage with government regulators, parliamentarians, arrange conferences, seminars, workshops, and run training events. Produce reports. We've got a couple coming out just this week and next, actually, which is this week it'll be review, which is a summary of everything in the renewable and clean tech sector, jobs, investments, and deployment. So look out for that one. We undertake media engagement and provide information and news, etc. Sorry. We need to update this slide because if you can see in the bottom right, that's someone who we might have all forgotten already, reading the latest version of that report I mentioned, review. So we'll move swiftly on from this slide. So yeah, like I say, one member, one vote. Proudly not-for-profit community interest company, working with the sector and industry, parliamentarians and governments. We've got a subsidiary REAL, which runs training and provides industry best practice and consumer protection. And we run things like the Green Gas Certification Scheme and similar schemes for a range of other things. But if you're for consumers putting solar panels on their roofs at home, for example, the company installing those should be a member of RECC, which is part of REAL, and that ensures they do things properly. Which is all a way of saying that we have interaction with consumers and industry and government, and that allows us to see ahead in terms of the smart picture of energy, the energy system and how that's developing. and yeah, a bit of background. So could move to that. Thank you. So we published a kind of strategy for the sector summer last year, which is a pathway to get to 100% renewables and clean tech by 2050. We see that in 4 different pillars: circular bioresources, heat and cooling, transport, power and flexibility, and finance underpinning it all. And as part of that, we've got a few hundred recommendations to government to how to get there. But smart energy, a smarter system is very much part of that and underpinning it all. So yeah, if anyone's interested in that, feel free to contact me afterwards. I can send you some more details on that. So, okay. So just a kind of high-level overview of some policy developments in this space. Apologies if you're aware of it already or if it's completely new to you. Very happy to take any questions at the appropriate time or to follow up with anyone afterwards as well. So move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, just this summer, feels a long time ago, but during this year we had the CCC's latest progress report on UK greenhouse gas emissions. And the summary is good targets in place, but big policy gaps, especially around heat and transport. We've got the ambition, but we need the route to get there. I think that's probably not a surprise to anyone on this call, but just to summarize that. And they've highlighted certain gaps. There's over 300 recommendations for policy actions across 600 pages. That includes certain actions in relation to moving to what we could classify as a smarter system, in line with this call, around more energy storage, more flexibility, greater use of technology and data as well. So yeah, even the government's own kind of official advisors in the CCC are pointing up to this area and the need to do more. So if we can move to the next slide, please. We have had some investment and some policy progress in some areas in moving to a smarter system, such as, for example, the hydrogen investment package. This is a considerable amount of funding for new hydrogen projects. Yeah, there's a business model with 100 million for electrolytic. There's 240 million for net zero hydrogen funds, and then there's a low carbon hydrogen standard, which sets out a framework for developing electrolytic, zero carbon, low carbon hydrogen production. This is all in progress at the moment, under development, but we expect to see significant areas of investment in the next few years. One reason for highlighting this is that it could be combined with, so you could have electrolytic electrolyzers in combination with solar farms, for example, or wind farms, where that could be retrofitted onto existing sites. And there's no reason in theory why that couldn't be at a community-owned site. Maybe, as I said, maybe not in kind of central London, but elsewhere and in the home counties, etc. Yeah, this is an area of active policy development on this smart tech side. So moving on to the next slide. Yeah, we've also got a significant amount of legislation in the works. We started with one energy bill at the start of the year. That's now split into 2 energy bills: the Energy Security Bill, which is going to enact certain elements of the British Energy Security Strategy, which was actually 2 prime ministers ago. So we'll see how much of it survives. But this is doing things such as smart systems, energy storage and flexibility measures. So defining electricity storage in the legislation for the first time in primary legislation, setting up greater competition for connecting to the grids, the establishment of what they're calling the future system operator, which will be a new body partly based on National Grid ESO's current functions, but which will be much more strategic in terms of having an overview across electricity and heat as well, and look to join up planning on the grids and networks in a more coherent way. So that's useful for moving to a smarter system. There's also new regulations around load control and energy smart appliances. So this is the kind of growing recognition within government that we'll have millions of smart devices connected to the grid in the next few years, and there needs to be some control of those and regulations behind them, especially in regards to things like energy, cybersecurity. So there's new regulations coming into force for that, so that's one to be aware of. And as ever, smart metering, the continued campaign there. This legislation will also enable some of those hydrogen package, which was on the previous slide, including a whole village or even town. They're talking about trial of hydrogen, so moving a whole location onto hydrogen for their heating before they make a decision on the use of hydrogen more broadly in the heat network, which is slated for 2026. So there's also some stuff around industrial decarbonisation, heat networks, and it does introduce the default tariff price cap as well. Crucially in this as well, we're talking about the Energy Networks Commissioner being created. So that position has now been appointed. And that's someone called Nick Windsor, who's got an extensive background in the industry. And the idea is that this person helps to kind of join up thinking and development on the grids and network side. So again, that's helping to think strategically about creating a smart system using different elements of the grid, including storage and upgrading the grid to deal with it. Yeah, there's a link there to the fact sheet. I think Si's put one in the link in the chat as well. Okay, so and then the other new bill we had, like I said, we started with one. It's been split into energy security bill, which is on hold at the moment. We've got a meeting with number 10 about it this week, so we'll be able to find out more. And then we've got the energy prices bill, which is now the Energy Prices Act, and that enables the consumer protection and business protection for energy bills. And it's also looking to introduce a price cap, revenue cap for generators. And that's a big part of what we in the sector are working on at the moment, but I won't go into that. But if you're interested, let me know. Okay, so if we move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So there's also been some other changes in this space in the last few months. So the spring statement this year introduced 0% VAT on energy saving materials, time limited up to 2027. This is good news. Basically, it covers standalone solar installations and solar plus storage. So moving to a smarter system is partly about making sure that the system is fit for purpose with storage alongside generation. So this is a nice enabler for that at the smaller scale. However, it doesn't include zero rate VAT for when you install energy storage just on its own in a property, and that's something which we're looking to see adopted. But you can see on the right hand side those bits of smart tech and less smart tech, which have now got zero rated VAT up until April 2027. So that's something to be aware of. So yeah, if we move to the next slide, please. On the broader side, heat is obviously an area of much in need of decarbonisation. The RHI is closed now for domestic and non-domestic projects. So we're left with the boiler upgrade scheme. And that is now live. Payments have started. It's a grant of up to £5,000 to households and yeah, domestic properties essentially, which will not cover the whole cost, or very unlikely to, but is a move in the right direction. However, it will only support about 30,000 installations a year. It's supporting biomass boilers, but only in non-urban locations. So it's mostly focused around heat pumps, I think it's fair to say. But yeah, this moves around that. Building regulations have been updated prior to the Future Building Standard and Future Home Standard, which should come in from 2025, which effectively means a ban on new gas boilers in new build houses from that date. There are consultations ongoing about banning in existing buildings when you come to replace your gas-fired or fossil-fired boiler, ensuring that the replacement is a low-carbon alternative for the domestic sector. The dates mooted for that are in the early 2030s to mid 2030s. So that is another area to be aware of, and we're looking for the finalization of that soon. But that should mean that from a few years' time, we'll start to see many more zero emission heating devices going into homes and businesses, which is obviously welcome. You know, especially with some heat network funding available, there could be opportunities for community groups there, but the key barrier as always is financing and how to pay for it, because we would argue that the finance isn't in place from government yet to make that happen. Moving on, flexibility markets. This is a big area of development. So this covers energy storage, what's called DSR, so demand side response, demand turn down. There's lots of markets kind of in place for these services, but they're a bit patchy and incoherent. So there lots of different DNOs run them at times, which is great, but there's not really a national program set out in a coordinated way. So we're looking to see those markets develop. But there are some new ones. So if you have an energy storage device, you can sign up for these markets and get paid for acting in a way which helps the grid. So in a kind of smart systems way in the next year or so. We may come on to it later, but the DNOs are doing some great work in terms of enabling new flexible grid connections. That's interesting because you can have a kind of time profile connection or a shared connection. If you've got, say, a wind farm with an existing grid connection, you can now share that with, say, a solar farm, for example, or a storage device, and make use of it when it's not currently in use for that extra capacity. So that's a really welcome development. And then finally here we've got the green taxonomy proposals, which is looking to classify different technologies as green or otherwise, and that's under development, currently in stasis a little bit given the change of government, but that'll be interesting because that should start to see technologies such as energy storage classified as green, which should help unleash investment or increase investor appetite in this space in the corporate world, and hopefully that would spill over into the other parts of the market as well. By the way, just inside, I can see there's lots of questions coming on the chat. Will we cover them at the end?
Well, yeah, we're going to have a Q&A with you, Frank, immediately after you finish. There's a couple of interesting things coming through there. So yeah, I've noted them for you. Great. Oh, great. Thanks. Also, give me a warning when I'm talking too much and you need me to shut up. You've got 5 minutes, Frank. You're doing well. Okay, great. Cheers. Okay, so on to the next slide then, please. Yeah, so a major part of what's happening in the market as well in this shift to a smarter energy system, but also in light of the British Energy Security Strategy, which basically comes out of the events in the Ukraine, is the review of electricity market arrangements, or REMA. So this is looking at kind of capacity adequacy. So is there enough power being generated to keep the lights on, ensuring low carbon investments, making sure wholesale markets are fit for purpose to encourage that, encouraging flexibility, so that's key for the smart agenda, and ensuring operability through services like ancillary services. We've had the closure of the initial consultation. It's safe to say that
it's slightly been superseded by recent events on energy price caps and so forth. But what's important to bear in mind in this is that this will be a key process in the next few years. It's not going to be quick, which will look to unlock smart energy business models and get more technologies on the grid. Yeah, if we move to the next slide, please. So they're looking at different market designs, and you know, these could be real routes to market for everyone in the future. But the overriding aim is to kind of decouple the cost of electricity from the cost of gas, because at the moment we've seen obviously the high price for gas setting the marginal price for everything, and we don't see the cut through of the extremely low cost of renewable generation being, we don't see the benefit of that going into people's bills, and that is a real fundamental flaw to the market at the moment. So REMA is designed to hope to overcome that and lower people's bills and encourage more low carbon investment. So there's just some fairly open ideas from government about how to do this. I won't go into this except to say that they're looking at kind of more localized markets and more hands-on DSOs, so the DNOs becoming DSOs, and models such as energy as a service. So there could be real opportunities here once it's all settled down for the community groups, we'd hope to play into these markets and benefit from them. So if we go to the next slide, please. Yeah, I probably won't go into this, bear in mind the time, but yeah, let's move on to the next slide. Thank you. So just in terms of the market developments in the last kind of few minutes, everyone will be aware, I'm sure, of the development of kind of EV charging hubs, but these are really exciting. So you've got solar, battery storage normally, and high-powered EV charging all on the same site. The bottom right is the first such example in the UK, GridServe in Essex. And there you got on the left-hand side, you've got some battery storage units. You've got the solar canopies with PV on top, and then underneath that you've got the charging stations, all wrapped up with a nice kind of retail centre for your dwell time whilst your car's charging. And obviously that's a significant investment, and that's a kind of gold-plated example. But you know, to my mind, I can't see any reason why, in theory, community groups wouldn't start to maybe look to do this in the future. And it's very exciting. Electric vehicle charging is an area which we cover in the REA as well. Very fast moving, lots and lots of investment, lots of government targets. One of the things which they're funding at the moment is for actual revenue support for local authorities to get some knowledge in-house to help roll out local charging. So actually that kind of model could be really good for community groups to engage with, and it's called the local EV infrastructure fund, which is a £900 million fund providing grants to make sure that everyone is able to benefit from EVs, and the charging infrastructure is rolled out nationwide, including in kind of local areas. So that is a possible area to look at for future projects. If we move to the next slide, please. Yeah, I mentioned hydrogen. Again, you know, that it's a fast moving area. It's a new area by and large in this space, but lots going on, lots of government support available. It'd be fantastic in future years to see some community hydrogen projects. Like I say, they can be electrolyzers retrofitted onto existing solar and wind farms, as far as I'm aware, and that's happened in the commercial sector already. So, yeah, the key there is having an offtake, a route to market for your hydrogen which you produce. A lot of people are looking at transport as an early market, for example, so hydrogen fueled HGVs. That's key one to look at, but this area will only continue to grow, especially after we get the decision on hydrogen's use in domestic heating, which is 2026. But that would really open the floodgates to direct injection of hydrogen into gas grids, subject to upgrades, etc., and make it much simpler to sell your hydrogen.
Frank, I think we're gonna. Have you got a last slide to turn to?
Yeah, I think we've got. I won't go into this again, but things to look out for on the market developments include market-wide half-hourly settlements. This is Ofgem have rubber stamped the move to much more granular charging, basically, of electricity tariffs at the domestic level and non-domestic. That's going to be coming in the next few years. That is going to become a massive market driver for having flexibility on the system, so energy storage, so that you are varying your use of electricity at any one time from the grid, and then you're modulating that using energy storage devices, which you're charging from solar or other sources. But the price differential will be in place so that it's a real price incentive not to use power at a certain time or to put power back onto the grid at a certain time. So for sites like schools and hospitals and community centres, this could become a route to market for energy storage and an innovative form of community projects, perhaps. So if we move on quickly. Yeah, there we go.
Perfect. Well done, Frank. I was just about to say that the half-hourly meeting thing, I think I've been hearing about that for over 10 years or so without paying huge amounts of attention to it. But it does always seem to be the thing that's on the horizon and coming sometime soon, but never quite there. But you're saying the date, which is really important for opening up, as you say, the whole flexibility market. The date is now set in stone, is coming very soon.
Yeah, I will double check that.
Somebody's laughing there. We'll find out shortly, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, shows you there viewing it, and yeah, we'll see. But it's been signed off by Ofgem, so I think it's coming in the next few years. I'll double check the details and send it on. But yeah.
Okay. Well, we've had a couple of things about hydrogen, but I'm going to push that to the side for at the moment. That's not the focus of our discussion today. That's okay, even though I know the REA is working on that. There's a couple of questions here that I'll throw at you, Frank, but I'll just take Chair's prerogative to say, I mean, have the recent increases in electricity prices and the worries about blackouts, has that accelerated the discussion about flexibility?
Yeah, I'd say so, definitely. So there's an interesting, it feels like way back in the midst of time now, but summer last year there was a few blackouts, which people might remember, and there was some interesting analysis which showed that the energy storage assets around the country helped to delay the impacts of that, and if we had a scaling up, then it would have been mitigated essentially. So that is kind of feeding through to the market, but then also, like you say, the current cost of electricity has become a real driver. So our members tell us that they're very busy in this space. Installers are extremely busy with solar and storage systems.
Of course, we're seeing kind of an almost daily show of Octopus Energy on the media about themselves as a bigger supplier and their series of very kind of forward-looking services for consumers.
Yeah, they're one of our members, so proud to have them in the association, and they're doing some great stuff. They also have a great publicity team, as you point out. Yeah, and they've obviously taken on bulbs customers now, so even bigger. But things like Agile Octopus, their investment on wind power, where they've got their kind of collective ownership model for that is fantastic. So yeah, one to look out for. Obviously, they and OVO are pioneering this new demand turn down service with National Grid ESO as well this winter, where you can save 100 quid odd with a smart meter, and that's the kind of model they're looking to bring in. They've also got an electric vehicle arm who are combining with Agile Octopus so that you can have a smart tariff to charge your EV on at home. So yeah, there's some really great stuff they're working on.
Lots going on. Perhaps that's why they call Octopus, lots of arms to deal with there. A couple of questions here in the chat I'll fire at you. One from Dermot Barnes. Perhaps this will be covered by other speakers, but what is the status of legislation regarding aggregation and sales of electricity across multiple sites? Is that anything you can help us on with, Frank?
That's a very good question. So there's been some recent moves in the balancing mechanism, and also the capacity market enables this. So balancing mechanism used to be available only to much larger sites. You can now sign up for the balancing mechanism up to 1 megawatt, but you can aggregate units up to that level. What's the balancing mechanism? It's the system for keeping supply and demand in check hour by hour in the UK. Normally you sign over your kind of responsibility for that with your PPA to a supplier, but you can directly participate in it if you'd like to. It's a very peaky market where the price goes up and down in a roller coaster kind of fashion, but if you're generating at the right moment, you can get a lot of you can make a lot of revenue at that time.
Not the easiest for smaller players, but I understand.
Yeah.
Another question, you mentioned about the zero VAT rating. We've got a question from Dave Powers, which you may or may not be able to answer, Frank, but is the zero VAT rating just for domestic projects, or does it extend as far as community buildings as well?
Yeah, it should be. It depends on, not being a tax advisor. If you're VAT registered, the organization is doing the actual purchasing. Yeah, but there's a set of exclusions. So even for the higher rates, there's a set of exclusions there, which are around if the person purchasing it is 60 or over, if they're receiving any types of benefits, and I think if they're a community group as well. So again, I can send around some more information on that, but it very much depends on the circumstance.
Yeah, never the easiest thing. Talk about VAT. Final question here. We're running slightly over time, but the final question here about data in terms of, for instance, solar being connected to the grid. Data on solar connected to the grid was very granular when we had the feed-in tariffs in place, because obviously you wanted the feed-in tariff and therefore you would register for it. But we don't have the feed-in tariff in place anymore. So there's a question about how well do we know the smaller bits of generation being connected. Alan Mills has asked, replying to the FIT database question, which is what was asked by Sydney Charles, there is still the MPAN number required for the smart export guarantee, but I'm not sure how many projects are even going for the smart export guarantee. But any thoughts on that, Frank, before we move on to our next speaker, Pete Capener?
Yeah, definitely. So smart export guarantee replacement for the FIT. Last year we had about 20,000 installs, which is a record for the program. Obviously very inadequate compared to the FIT in terms of its lack of long-term price, lack of fixed price, lack of fixed term contract. The database is a big issue. It's something we call for when it's first brought in. That wasn't part of it. We've had several initiatives from the E&A, so the grid networks, to have a database of distributed assets. That's under development. Maybe your UKPN speaker can say more about that. And then we've also just recently in the last week, we've seen MCS launch their MCS data dashboard. And I'm hoping that is going to provide some more granular data on this side of things. But in theory, when a microgen scheme is connected, it's a notifiable to the building department locally, so the electrician should submit something for that. That could then be used to compile data in some kind of database. Whether or not that happens is another matter. The other route is through the G100 method through the DNOs, so that's what the E&A are exploring, I believe. But yeah, the short answer is there's no central government database, so it's down to groups like the DNOs to try and make it happen, and MCS. So there are moves afoot in the industry to do that, but it's not being finalised yet.
Yeah, I think that's my kind of interpretation. As Mary's put in the chat column as well, all generators should be notified to DNOs. That is the case, but whether or not that happens with the DNO knows, that's another thing. And Paul Allen from Power Up North London just mentioned we're having difficulties getting the SEG registered with Octopus for some of our PV sites. So clearly more work to be done there. Frank, I hope you can stay with us till 12, because we're going to bring you back as part of a round table towards the end. And one of the things I'd like everybody to reflect on, possibly a part of our speakers, is, you know, am I right in thinking that there is this vision around a smarter energy London where communities can play and local energy can play a wider role? So we'll return to that as we go on. We'll move on swiftly now to our next speaker, Pete Capener. Pete, you're sharing your slides. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Said. My name is Pete Capener. I'm MD of Bath and West Community Energy, also Deputy Chair of Community Energy England and co-chair of the Government Advisory Group on Community Energy. Said asked me just to give a bit of a view on our Flex Community project, looking at community's response to demand-side management. But as I'll touch on, this is going to need to address or draw in other elements of the community energy agenda in order for it to be viable. But just a very quick bit about BWCE. We've operating since 2010. We've raised 21.5 million through a mixture of community finance, half of that coming through senior debt from the Ethical Bank Triodos to build 13 megawatts plus of community renewables, enough to supply the annual demand, match the annual demand from 4,500 homes. Mixture of ground mount solar, ranging in size, strong focus on biodiversity, and rooftop schemes, also ranging in size. We also now have best part of 2 megawatts now actually under development of rooftop solar. We're looking at building out 1 megawatt this financial year and more next. Mainly schools, but not only schools, and utilising on-site use primarily, but then securing PPAs rather than smart export guarantees for the export element. One small water wheel, very lovely to have something other than solar, but unfortunately it's not something we're going to replicate very quickly for various reasons. And we're seeking sites for wind turbines. The whole confusion about whether wind is or is not on planning, we're hopeful that in our local authority area anyway, we see local planning policies implemented very soon that will at least open the door to wind turbines locally. And those projects have all generated community benefit in a number of different forms, one of which is funding that we distribute through our community fund, currently around about 340,000, back out into support community projects, fuel poverty, carbon reduction across a whole range of different initiatives, community orchards, reuse and recycling, transport, education, whole range of stuff, which really brings the community into the whole debate, as I'm sure other community energy groups would testify. So Flex Community then. What we were trying to do with this is build on the recognition that heat and transport is rapidly being electrified. How can we, in that process, facilitate demand-side response, and also, importantly, simulating local energy supply? I'll come on to the importance of that in this debate, but importantly also testing the role for community energy. Why should we get involved in this? And linked to that, designing, testing, refining a business model that could support that role potentially into the future. So we are 2 years, well, nearly 3 years now into a 4-year project, but we've still got quite a lot way to go. The project's predicated on or built around a cloud-based, smart cloud-based platform run by a company called STEMI Energy. They link that platform both to the DNO, Western Power Distribution, or National Grid as it is now in our case, and to householders. Those blue blobs at the bottom are meant to be immersion heaters and EV charge points. And clearly the role of the platform is to convey demand-side response requests from the grid operator and then control household appliances to respond to that, turn up or turn down electricity demand as needed, but through a process that learns household behavior in order to maximize comfort levels and also providing consumer control so that the consumer always ends up getting what they need, whether that's charged EVs or hot water. We are just starting to look at integrating heat pumps now as well. But that control also comes through a smartphone app from the householder's perspective, where they can provide information about what it is that they need, as well as seeing the results back out of it. We piggyback both on existing installations and also new installations. So part of this is looking to promote the installation of new EV charge points and heat pumps, but what we need to do is integrate the smart bit. We naively thought when we started off this, the smartness of the technologies would be built into the heat pumps or the EV charge points. And unfortunately, where it is, the standards are not compatible, interoperable. So, and also often don't communicate data quickly enough in order to really facilitate demand response. So we're having to integrate additional smart control devices linked to appliances and to also the whole kind of equivalent of a smart meter close to the consumer unit. Traditional smart meters aren't quick enough, again, for this type of flex response, although that being promoted by National Grid at the moment and others does carry off, build off just existing smart meters. So we're integrating additional technology. Just a quick bit of some of the results. We've had lots of different results, but there's one point that I particularly want to make that is illustrated by this set. So manual represents the average daily hot water bill. This is primarily for hot water consumers. The blue bit after savings, and the yellow bit is the bit of savings. Manual is baseline, effectively, with no control. Auto, no flex, is the average hot water bill when the automatic system is operating. So optimizing energy use, and in the case of hot water, is ensuring through learning about householder behavior that the hot water is heated when it's needed, rather than having long-standing losses within hot water tanks. So there's a larger amount of savings, but this hasn't been normalized, this data. So there was actually a higher level of hot water use during the period than during the baselining period. But importantly, when you start moving to introduce flex and responding to demand-side response requests from the DNO, then your ability to optimize appliance use goes down. So the amount of savings actually will go down, but the intention is to then generate value from the trade with the DNO and National Grid, if you have enough scale, to offset that loss of optimum use. So it's important to recognize that there is a trade-off between optimization and flex sometimes. So we started generating results, but we've also in parallel was starting to design a business model that we could then test. And the important thing about this is that we're looking at multiple revenue streams here. So flex trading, as you mentioned, the payment by the DNO for demand response, turning up or turning down, or payment by National Grid or the DNO. That needs to be split between the householder, the platform, and potentially the community group. So very difficult to make it stack up just on that by itself. So also looking at other potential income streams. Is it possible to generate some value from the householder if what you're ending up doing is creating significantly lower bills through optimization? is there a subscription that the householder might pay? Similarly with the contractors, if you're offering access to market, which is part of the intention of this around a portal that will promote the install of heat pumps and EV charge points, potentially facilitate that. Again, is there the potential for a contractor subscription that introduces complications around referral fees and independence, but it is potentially manageable. The other area is local supply, and we think that this is a critical element of knitting all of this together. And within local supply, what Frank was talking about earlier about storage also fits into this, because if we can bring together demand and supply at a local level and generate a relationship between the consumer and where they're getting the electricity from, then you can potentially motivate greater levels of demand switching away from peak times when it's most carbon intensive through to when you're potentially generating the electricity during the middle of the day if it's solar. So if we can integrate supply into the model, both from an offer point of view, but also from a business planning point of view, then we have more potential of making this all stack up. Because our conclusion, certainly at the moment, is that flex trading, there isn't enough value in the market to warrant a significant or to support intermediaries like community energy groups getting involved. Hardly enough to actually warrant the householder. And that's recognized most recently within the National Grid's revised pricing for the programs that they've just launched. So this kind of, we then took this and started thinking, well, what does this mean in terms of scale? We're operating at tens of households at the moment, and we obviously that doesn't stack up, but at what level does it start to stack up? So we were starting thinking, well, there are a number of factors to that. One is around the ability to access the national balancing markets as well as the local dynamic services from the DSOs, but you need scale to operate at that. So that's partly about the capacity available for flex, and also just numbers of households, about generating levels of income and therefore what might be generated for householders and also for communities. So looking at 1,000 households, we came to the conclusion that just flex by itself doesn't stack up. But that's partly because we're looking at significant CapEx investment around the additional equipment, not the equipment around for the heat pumps or the EV charge points, but this is the actual additional equipment to make it, make the kit smart, which feels to us as a very inefficient way of doing things. The equipment is also quite expensive at the moment, and the prospect of reducing that equipment cost significantly is there. But even then, if you look at reducing that cost significantly by a quarter, 3/4 rather, it's still only just looking at break even. Really, what you need to do is cut out that cost totally, and then rely on cloud-to-cloud communication between the EV charge point, heat pump, and the cloud. There are issues there about speed of response, but if that can be resolved, then that's going to make it far more possible to create a viable model within all of this. But this is just looking at the trading side of things, the flexibility. Without the household subscription side of things, if we can increase optimization, and certainly not around local energy supply. Syed, just shout at me when I've got 5 minutes left, please.
You've got 5 minutes left, Pete.
Thank you. That's good timing. Grand. So the next phase of this, we're looking to expand the householder numbers, looking to integrate heat pumps, as well as the hot water heating and EV charge points, but also looking to integrate local energy supply as, I say, a motivation for demand shifting. looking to shift the peak demands when it's most carbon intensive, maximizing the use of solar. And that is both solar on householders' roofs, but also community solar. So we're utilizing an existing 250 kilowatt grid connected solar array near Bath, as well as a combination of domestic PV systems, pooling the export from that and then allocating it to participating consumers, and then testing the extent to which that link motivates further demand shifting. We're using real data, but simulating the trading element of this, because the local supply bit is not, as we know, is not possible from a regulatory point of view unless we implement something like Mary's Energy Local that you're going to be talking about shortly. Unfortunately, our system here doesn't work for the Energy Local setup, because we're operating at voltage levels that are too disparate. However, it's certainly something that we will be looking at in the future. But the purpose of this is around the consumer behavior bit and trying to understand better the relationship and between that and the demand shifting, and whether we as a community group can therefore build on our strengths around the community renewables bit and provide a real vehicle for community involvement in the wider agenda. So Flex community findings to date. Connectivity is critical. We've had significant project delays around compatibility issues, smart control device reliability issues. This is a major, major issue, and we need to get everybody around a table, set up interoperable standards that are fit for purpose, and then ensure that manufacturers implement them. We have something for EV charge points, but even so, it's not implemented fully. The business model only stacks up if we look at multiple revenue streams and or look at increased market value. At the moment, the flex market is predicated on the value of avoided infrastructure improvements. We should be looking at the cost of carbon as well, and carbon reduced, and valuing that within the market. We should be getting far more value from flex. If we had that, then also that provides more headroom for participants like community groups, who we believe are absolutely critical. And this is an area that we're already demonstrating within the project, confirmed the value of this intermediary role, building on local trust and credibility to generate the interest and engagement necessary to get householders involved in what is, let's face it, not straightforward way of thinking about energy. And beyond the already converted, the pioneers, the people who really like and get into all of this sort of thing, making it mainstream is going to need actors like community energy groups to really build it in. So I won't go through all the other things, but that's me. Thanks, Syed.
Pete, that's a fantastic last slide as well, in terms of rounding up some of the key issues and also highlighting that point that we make an awful lot of the process for the energy transition, that you need those interlocutors, you need those intermediaries at the local level to actually handhold consumers into the kind of a new system. And the community energy groups can't do everything, but they can certainly do an awful lot in terms of filling those gaps between the bigger players and the local authorities. The compatibility question you said at the beginning of that last slide seems absolutely critical to me. Where is that fitting in things like the government smart energy plans? That surely that's got to be a cornerstone.
Yes, I've not seen it. There is discussions within some of the associations around this, and Frank may have information about that. But I think in BEIS there is a recognition of this. I'm not sure how much activity has been taken on it, though. Okay. I mean, the problem is we have standards like the OCPP standards for EV charge points, but they're still not being implemented fully. Not all manufacturers are using the most up-to-date standards. So we have real problems even with the standards that we have.
Okay, and good luck with then integrating the heat pumps into the equation within the Flex Community Project as well, because that sounds like yet another area of complexity. Sorry. One question that came through, of course, some of the bigger players are coming in with products, so that wasn't there when Flex Community started. Do you still see the role for the local when some of the bigger guys are going to come in with their clever AI algorithms to kind of work on the network? Where do we fit in against the bigger guys?
I think you're absolutely right, and we're looking at this now and trying to understand ourselves what the impact of it is. My feeling is that what I was just saying about the community role still holds true. So National Grid's project will get significant take-up because they're looking at nationally. They've got a larger pool of the committed pioneers that they can cherry pick, which is what Octopus did for its initiative last year. But if once you go beyond those pioneers, how are you going to get the kind of standard consumers who don't think about energy much to engage with the complex area around Flex, where you've got to share your data, you've got to offer access to your own appliances to third parties. There's a lot of trust issues in that, and I don't see it becoming a mainstream offer without that community or some intermediary. There could be other intermediaries and not just communities, but I think there needs to be a local dimension to this where people are actually working with consumers to raise the profile and importance of it. So my feeling is that the process is going to get simplified for Flex with these large scale initiatives, which is great. And hopefully the problems that we've faced within Flex Community will get resolved from a technical and operational point of view. But the behavioral bit will still remain, and that's our strength. That's our focus.
That's actually an absolutely brilliant bit, and the behavioural bit has wandered away from policymakers. I think the last 5 or 6 years, it's only coming back into it again. But I don't think it's reached the area of some of the issues that you guys have been taking forward in such a kind of like vanguard way. Pete, thank you very much for that. That was really, really helpful, really stimulating. All power to Flex Community on their project. We'll swiftly move on to our next speaker, Dr. Mary Gillie from Energy Local. And I think, Jess, you're hosting the slides there, if you could bring those up. Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Pete.
Got some slides, or I'll just carry
Sorry,
on.
bear with me. I'm just sharing. Just shared the wrong screen. That was all.
Right. Well, while you're doing that, I'm Mary Gillie. I founded Energy Local. I've kind of stopped counting how many years ago because it just gets depressing. I'm going to apologise now. These aren't really all singing or dancing slides, but hopefully they're a bit of an aid memoir for me for talking on for you after the event. I'll go on to the next slide. So yeah, I'm going to kind of just kind of go in straight to just what Energy Local is, what I call Energy Local vanilla. Probably be quite a few of you may well have heard of this before, but we set this up because we wanted to create local energy markets. I kind of get a little bit irritated when people say it's not possible to have local supply yet. No, it's not perfect, but come on, guys. I can give you bread and butter, but maybe not the jam yet, but come on. So I'll just take this example, which is our first one in Bethesda, which is where I live in North Wales, which is a hydro. Okay, we're not going to have many hydro in London, but the same works with solar or whatever. I would say now I've just stopped trying to update the example prices on this slide because it just became impossible. But where we started was we wanted people in the local community to be able to get a benefit from using their local power when it was being generated. So what they do is they form what we call an Energy Local Club. Legally, it's a co-op. They all have smart meters. They all have to work with the same supplier, and that shows when they're using power as well as how much. And so then you can share out the generation between all the people who are using that power within each half hour. And they agree a local price for that power. It's above the PPA price, and it's below the kind of domestic price of power. So you've kind of got a window there that you can negotiate with your generator. And over and above that, the householders for any what we call extra energy that isn't being generated locally. So in the case of solar, overnight in the middle of winter, in the case of hydro, if there's a drought, it hasn't been raining very much, they have the extra energy that's sold by the supplier, and that's on a time of use tariff. Stays the same every day, but it's 3 bands. Cheapest during the night, more expensive during the day, and most expensive from 4 to 8. So there's kind of an extra way of saving money by shifting power, first of all, to use renewables, the local renewables, which is always the cheapest, and then away from those peak times. Okay, next slide. So it's about retaining wealth in the local economy. We find particularly the poorest people, if you give them a saving, that money tends to get respent in the local economy. If the generation is locally owned, then that goes back into the local economy as well. It's a direct action on fuel poverty by reducing bills. It provides the environment, which I will talk about in future in a few minutes, of kind of all things kind of around flexibility. And where we want to get to is so that that money can then be reinvested, and there's a better business case for new renewables. And it provides a degree of shelter from global energy prices, and it helps kind of probably hopefully one of the first sort of building blocks to decoupling our electricity market from our gas market. Obviously, it's a route to encouraging people to use sort of energy efficiency. We kind of, quite interesting, I was looking at the energy usage from this time last year compared with time this time this year of Bethesda's energy club. There were actually 20 less people in the club this time last year because I hadn't quite come on board, and yet we're actually, even when you try and take into account kind of warmer temperatures this time this year, we seem to be using less electricity, even though there's 20 more people in the club, which is quite interesting because it does show that people have become more aware about how they use energy. Okay, next slide. So we have a number of aids to help people use make it just more practical for people to shift their energy and match local generation. So we have what we call the energy dashboard. Can have a look at dashboard.energylocal.org.uk. Sorry, I should have put that on the slide. And that gives a forecast of generation. It gives how much the community as a whole has used the power, and it gives a breakdown of savings. It's kind of got a traffic light system of good times and bad times to use power, and then it also gives a breakdown of the individual usage. And we use what's called a consumer access device, which is the way of getting data out of a smart meter in the house. Should actually be the consumer incredibly hard to use in any way possible because it's completely crap designed device. But anyway, we've designed our own to try and get around that so people can actually see their data in real time in a kind of usable format rather than the sort of crappy IHDs that you normally get with a smart meter. And then for the loads that are possible to schedule, which is actually only a small part, schedule automatically, maybe we should say, we have a what we call our demand shaper. So this can be a smart plug for plug-in appliances, got a means of doing that for washing machines and dishwashers. It could be an EV, done with storage heaters and heat pumps. Not all heat pumps, or not all EVs, I hasten to add. But it's a little bit more complicated when you're looking at a whole community, because you've just got, it's not like PV on your house when it's just you using that power. The local generation, it's almost like a cake. And if everyone's trying to eat the cake at the same time, everyone gets a smaller slice of the cake. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, if the hydro is going full blast, you're more likely to get a bigger slice of that hydro cake than you are at 6 o'clock at night when everyone's coming home and trying to use the hydro. So when other people in your community are using power, and that's all power, not just schedulable power like heat pumps and so on, has an impact on when the best time to use power is, as well as how much generation there is, and also the time of use tariff for any extra power you use. So it's quite a complicated signal to send out, more than just kind of a standard price signal. It's sent out every 24 hours. And obviously, if people change when they're using power, that's kind of fed back into that signal. So if you send it out too often, people just become really erratic. So kind of every 24 hours. So it forecasts when is a good time to use power every 48 slots during the day for the next 24 hours. This is an example. And then you can say, I want this done by X time. So I need my washing machine done by this time because I've got to hang out the washing so it's dry for Johnny to have his football kit. Or if we go on to the next slide, I need my EV charged by 80% by this time. And then it'll find the best time to do it. We've also, because as I say, we've just got this one cake, we've also started implementing the idea that you don't actually want everything scheduled at the same time. So, for example, at night, say during the night, if you've got hydro going all the night, or it's just cheap price at night, then you kind of want to stagger your appliances during the night. So we're kind of building that into it as well. To be honest, we haven't had too much problem with literally the communication with a lot of smart appliances where we can, because the API that has been set by a certain supplier with 8 legs has become fairly ubiquitous. Our problem more is trying to bash on the door of goodness knows how many different EV chargers, getting an audience with them to actually integrate with their system. But the kind of API is becoming fairly ubiquitous now. We've been a couple of heat pumps that we've been able to implement as well, which obviously has the additional problem of you've got to take into account the temperature, etc. as well. We have found this winter we contacted various people with storage heaters, and they said, yeah, we asked first of all, have you got storage heaters? We said, would you like to have some controls on them? And they said, oh well, no, because we don't use them because we can't afford them. So that's quite telling in itself. Okay, the next slide. Okay, just kind of wind back a bit. What do we mean by flexibility? I think people have kind of touched on this. It's kind of at lots of different levels. There's the shifting and matching to manage, and matching local generation to manage local constraints. And you can't do that from the other side of the country. You've only got the load locally to be able to manage that. But then you've also got shifting away from peak usage to match spare renewables. And obviously, if things get really tight, then National Grid are sending out signals as well. And that's kind of part of shifting away from peak times. It's just when it gets really serious and National Grid step in. So the things are on lots of different scales. They can potentially conflict with each other. And we've now got kind of market stacked on market stacked on market stacked on market, which is kind of really impractical. It's kind of trying to patch up a system that isn't really working. If we go to the next slide. And then when you look at it and you think, well, we're actually doing all that with Energy Local, because we're kind of encouraging everybody to shift everything that they're using away from peak times and using local power. Now, Mrs. Moggs maybe doesn't know that she's balancing the system, but that's what she's doing when she wants to use a spare solar from the school or whatever it is. So it's a really simple way of communicating that to people, and it means that you can use all their usage, not just kind of a heat pump or whatever. It also means that potentially you can put storage in a sensible place, i.e. one storage for a village or whatever, not kind of in individual houses, which is about, as far as running a system, about the stupidest place possible to put storage, but it's the only place that people can really get a value, apart from if you use something like Energy Local. And it avoids that conflict between different signals. And helps to manage our demand in sort of an all renewables market. Hopefully it's kind of one of those building blocks, as I say. So yeah, we're kind of just going to polish our halos and walk away and say we're job done. Okay, maybe not. Next next slide, please. So we have actually done some modelling as well as looking at it in detail, because we've only got 10 clubs. None of them are very big, so you know how representative is that is. But the kind of this demand shaper concept came out of Montfort University, and so they've been looking at, and they've got an absolutely brilliant model called Cascade. They looked at different kind of profiles of hydro, of hydro and solar with heat pumps and certain like the EVs. Sort of different combinations and increasing a number of heat pumps. Go to the next slide, please. And we found that we got a shift away from the peak. So we kind of actually, when you look at it, it's not actually a simple thing to look at, because you can kind of you can smooth out your peak. And actually that's probably more important than just like, is the highest point of the peak sort of reduced, etc. But we did find that we had a reduction, apart from one really anomaly where we thought, whoa, what's going on here? When we suddenly got an increase in peak of 5%. And when we looked at the data, we found that there was a sudden change in the weather. So that would have resulted in the heat pump kind of being caught out, as it were, of control of the heat pump component, and then people would have put on a boost, which is something to bear in mind. It's partly just kind of got to improve the algorithms, but actually with climate change, we're probably going to have whiplash kind of weather systems more often. And that's actually something we're going to really have to look at, I think, in future. Go to the next slide.
And 5 minutes, Mary.
Right, okay. But DNOs tend to want to know exactly what is going to be controlled. They kind of like to know. Most of the flexibility contracts up to now have been based on like, I'm going to turn down this heat pump, or I've got this storage in this place, which is great, but actually, if we want to harness like everybody's use, and we're not necessarily going to have a storage and the heat pumps in exactly the right point, and it's often just kind of for a few years to buy them some time. And they also want people to like submit data that's actually in the smart meters already. So if we go to the next slide, what we've been doing with SPEN is saying, right, can we have a community flexibility contract? And kind of just been trying this out when we're saying, right, we've got a collective group of MPANs. We can't say it's going to be this MPAN or that MPAN is going to turn down, but collectively we're going to be able to turn down. So we kind of simulated this in the sort of demand shaper. We suddenly made it a really, really, really bad time to use power between 4 and 8, just to see how much more we could turn down over and above what we're doing already, because we may actually go, you know what, we've done everything we can already. That's as good as you're going to get, DNO. So we tried it out last week, and we'll also demonstrate to a DNO how to give them the data that actually they've already got, but never mind. If we go to the next slide. So, well, how did we do? I think is probably the first thing. So we think we got about a 10% shift away from peak period, but it's actually really quite hard to calculate, because what we normally do in a flexibility contract is kind of compare it to a fortnight before. A massive variance in that. I mean, basically they're looking at a number, random number generator. So quite frankly, all their flexibility contracts at the moment are a load of rubbish, which is a bit of a hard message to break to them. But anyway, so then we looked at kind of the year before, then we're trying to take in temperature as well. But what we, as I say, already we'd noticed that people have reduced their overall demand. And interesting, people, the actual peak seemed to be about 7:30, 8 p.m. already. So it seemed to have been like that shifted already. So yeah, quite a lot of things to kind of try and work out actually how much over and above what they're doing already we can achieve. Because as I say, we may have just achieved it all that we can do already. If we go to the next slide. So as I say, 10% of what? So we kind of looked at various different measures, kind of how much we smooth the peak out, how much of like the total load in the day was actually being used between 4 and 8, ratio between base load and maximum demand. I'll be honest, I haven't crunched all those numbers yet. I'm still kind of scratching my head, but some really interesting data there, I think, about actually what we're looking at and how much, as I say, we may have just kind of achieved it all already. So, okay, next slide.
Well, I think it might have to be one of your last ones.
Yeah, it is. Don't worry, don't worry.
Good one. Good timing.
So, yeah, what for the future? Well, we need to move away from gas and use, not sue renewables, use renewables. And hopefully, I think as I touched before, we need kind of blocks of generation and demand that are kind of trading together. And this is like how firm those blocks of power are. And I think energy local clubs will be a building block of this. Unfortunately, I don't think REMA has even kind of got that concept in their head yet, which is a bit of a frustration for me. But that's kind of where I feel that we're kind of just building one of the building blocks for that. So thank you very much for the opportunity to have a chat with you. I'm happy to answer any questions, or do just get in touch with me. I'll contact them on the next page.
Mary, if I'm right, so basically we've got some of your information fresh off the press. I mean, this is all brand new, your stuff with Spen, correct?
Yeah, that's right. As I say, I kind of I've just realized that should be energylocal.org.uk, but anyway, yeah, it's fresh off the press. We were just doing it last week, and yeah, I thought it was going to be a really easy calculation until I started looking at it, and it was really interesting. But I'm like, okay, I'm really going to have to look at this in detail. It was just quite interesting. We set up a WhatsApp group, and it was just kind of quite a few people said, well, I think I've just like, I can't think of anything else more that I can shift. But also kind of sometimes it's like, sorry, look, I've got a really hungry teenager here. I'm sorry, I'm going to be feeding them toast now. You know?
Yeah, I could believe that. One quick question before we move on to our final speaker, and then the kind of group Q&A. Tom Broughton has asked in the chat column, Mary, I believe from a previous presentation of Energy Local, all the households in the club need to be connected to the same substation, ? Is that correct?
Same primary substation, yeah, not secondary, same primary. So that generally feeds quite a large area. It generally is the kind of area that you regard as your community. And I mean, I don't have a problem with that because it does give that local control and matching. Yeah. So.
Okay, it's great to make that distinction because of course there's a big difference there. Okay, and Peter's asked another question. I'll leave you to answer that in the chat column about voltage level. So we'll come back, we'll come into that perhaps in the group Q&A, but let's move swiftly on in our last half an hour or so to our final speaker, who is Lynne McDonald from UK Power Networks. Lynn, can you magically appear with your camera, hopefully somewhere? And Jess will be sharing your slides.
Morning. Sorry, I'm just camera. Let me just check.
Don't worry, Lynn. The key thing is your hair. That's brilliant.
Fantastic. Is that coming up? Yes.
Perfect, Lynn. Oh, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to Syed, Jess and the Community Energy London team for inviting UKIPR Networks and myself along. Just briefly, I've been with UKIPR Networks for 12 years, mainly focused on sort of energy sustainability and net zero. And in my new role this year, I'm heading up a new function focused on local area energy planning. And certainly within that process, community energy groups have a key role to play. Just jumping to the next slide is just to highlight who are UKIPR Networks. I've got two images here, which I like to call is the beautiful patchwork blanket of the customers that we serve. UKIPR Networks, we basically manage, operate basically electricity network in London, South East and East of England. We serve sort of multiple customers, diverse customers across all the three. If I focus down into London, being with Community Energy London today, London actually spans all three of our regions, East of England, London and our Southeastern region. I think it's also important to note within local area energy planning, this is where democratically elected parties or community groups are looking to decarbonise an area. We very much acknowledge our close working with our neighbouring peers. So in our case, that includes sort of Scottish and Southern electricity networks and the old Western power distribution. And certainly also with gas utilities like Caden and many others, is it's important for us to work collectively together to support plans. And also within our customers we of course serve Community Energy London groups, Community Energy East and Community Energy South and multiple net zero hubs. So we've got a large customer base and really our role as UKIPR Networks is to ensure that the electricity is fit for purpose for your local net zero plans and working with others to ensure that those come to fruition. Just jumping on to the next slide. Looking specifically to local authorities, UKIPR Networks serve 127 local authorities across our footprint, and that's about 127 of 300 across the UK. Specifically looking at the local authorities that UKIPR Network serves, when we look at local climate ambitions and plans, 80% of our local authorities have declared a climate emergency. And then 87% have set out a target for their local area to be basically net zero or carbon neutral before the national 2050 target. And comparing that to last year's customer and market intelligence that we lead, that 87% has moved up by 7%. So we can see a lot of positive, passionate local activity. And also what we're observing on local authorities' websites is in some occasions refreshing their plans and then moving from high-level plans to actionable outcomes. And this just highlights that we as UKIPR Networks, we're here to serve these ambitions. And also importantly, it's important for us to understand what is the what, where and when, because that's important out of these plans to ensure that we can successfully ensure that there's capacity access onto the connections onto our grids, and also looking at smart alternatives like flexibility. Just jumping on to the next slide. So what is local area energy planning? It's probably a term that came out first probably in 2020. There was a method document published by Ofgem and two research partners. And also you've got the Energy Systems Catapult that did some recent publications on the 4th of July. And really what I'd like to call out and focus on is that local area energy planning is a data-driven and whole energy system evidence-based approach. So local area energy planning ultimately is setting out a definition of a collaboration. And that involves local authorities bringing together local stakeholders, including community energy groups, and collating that local knowledge of decarbonisation projects and ambitions and setting out a decarbonisation pathway for a local area that they define. So clearly there's certainly you've seen from the Climate Change Committee, it does highlight that national policy on its own will not be enough to deliver net zero. And it has been called out that local authorities have a key role to play by influencing over 80% of the UK's carbon emissions. And that process can be supported by local area energy planning. And the challenge for local authorities enabling net zero is complex and immediate. But we believe local authorities with community energy groups, net zero hubs, supported by utilities like the electricity network operator, we can all play a pivotal role supporting and unlocking the decarbonisation quickly and at lowest cost, and ensuring that we work closely together to understand plans and ensuring those plans are built into our forecasts, which ultimately get built into investment plans. So just jumping on to the next slide. Recognising the urgency, we've been proactively engaging with local authorities and many groups that we serve in our local areas. And through that engagement, we've heard and listened and looking to respond to some of the challenges that local authorities and local stakeholders have highlighted to us. And that's included 3 main challenges. The first is around the lack of resource and expertise. The second is the access to data. And the third is around that analysis capability and spatial mapping. So putting yourself in the shoes of the work that you do on a day-to-day basis, as well as local authorities, place-based decisions are being made. What is being placed where, when, and what is that type of technology or type of exercise? And to do place-based decisions, data helps support the best identification for that route, but also having that visually in a spatial map helps then look at optioneering to compare what if scenarios of where you're going to install that electric vehicle, where you're going to install that solar photovoltaic and battery storage device. So in response to these 3 key challenges, what are we doing as UK Power Networks? Well, in terms of the lack of resource and technical expertise, we've set out in our business proposal that was submitted, and the final determinations come out very shortly, end of this year, that we will have a dedicated local area energy planning team that will grow to 20 persons, and they'll be basically responsible for the proactive engagement with local authorities, community groups and other local stakeholders to support plans and provide data, technical information and assessments. But we're not waiting till the price control period starts from next 1st of April 2023. This year we've mobilised, so I'm heading up the business function. We've actively recruiting, we've already brought on Net Zero Associates, and we'll continue to grow to meet the ask from local stakeholders. The second around access to data. I'll go into more detail shortly, but we've been collaborating with multiple partners externally to create a local authority data template. But this data template is also suitable for community energy groups. And we've now launched a dedicated local area energy planning page. And we see this being a sort of a knowledge centre for open data. And last by no means least is around analysis capability and spatial mapping. We registered an innovation project this March called CLEO, that stands for Collaborative Local Energy Optimisation. And through that innovation project, we're developing a free web-based online planning tool. And that will be enduring, that my team and I will oversee, that will be continually available to local authorities, community groups, consultants maybe supporting other partners like local authorities, who can then use that to make their best valued solution choices for place-based decisions for their local area. So jumping into the detail around access to data, moving to the next slide. We launched our open data portal back in sort of the early 2021. In our launch, we had about over 200 people attending, and one of the overwhelming asks was a focus on open energy data around net zero. Following that launch day, we then ran survey engagement through November and December of 2021, asking specifically what are the data sets around net zero that our stakeholders were interested in. We received 220 responses, and overwhelmingly, the selected open energy data pathway was a local authority-led net zero plan. So following that, this January, we ran a focus group with 13 diverse stakeholders, trying to understand what was the best course of action to respond to that. As you've heard earlier, local authorities highlighted a challenge around resourcing. So the ask was that we worked with one partner from a local authority and then tested that much widely. So we've been collaborating with Regen, a renewable charitable body. We've also been, we ran 6 workshops with Essex County Council, and then we've been testing out the local authority data template with Greater London Authority. And ultimately what we were looking at was to understand what are the data sets that are most pressing and most valuable when looking at local net zero planning challenges. So we asked, what are your open data use case questions? So you can see here examples on the right hand side of the slide. So first one is, I want to know the most viable places to connect. So beneath that use case, we then discussed and set out the data sets that either UKIPR networks had or the customer identified would be useful. And we also explored the different third-party data sets. Through this engagement, we identified 30 local net zero planning challenges. And beneath those 30, to support those, it was identified 153 unique data sets that would help them. And what we've done on Monday of last week, the 31st of October, we've launched a dedicated local area energy planning data page where 101 of those 153 unique data sets are all curated and available for use. I think one of the interesting insights from the piece of work that we performed is of those 153 unique data sets, I think it was about only 14 were data sets that related to UKIPR networks. So it just highlights the importance of third-party data sets from government or other bodies that helps place-based net zero planning decisions. There's also a thought leadership role where some of the data sets that were identified through this exercise through third parties, not all of them we would describe as publicly free in the fact that they were license free, some identified payment. So we've curated a page that has all the publicly available information, and we do welcome feedback. We are running a survey on that website, understanding what other data sets have you found that are useful. Is there anything else that you'd expect to see included, or if you have other data use case questions? And what we foresee for this particular dedicated open data page is available and open to all. So it is open to community energy groups. And as we continue to work together, this will be an evolving data page that gets updated through experience, and through each local area energy planning exercise, we determine what's the most valuable data set, or if there's a new data set required, then we can keep adding towards it. Just moving to the next slide, just to give a bit more detail about the project Clio, creating the digital planning tool. Since we registered this innovation project in March, we've been leading a sort of extensive discovery phase through engaging with community energy groups, also with local authorities, to find out what is the data information that people would like visualised, what is the function of a planning tool that would be required. And that is basically developed the requirements for the digital tool that's basically fed in directly into the tendering exercise that we're running at the moment as UKIPR networks. Centrally, this is a tool that's been developed to support planning activities and also to support the engagement between local authorities, community energy groups and UKIPR networks to make sure that information data is shared more efficiently. In this project, we're working with some exciting consortium partners. One I'd like to call out, which is That Product Studio, TPS. They're from the gaming industry. For those that may have played this game, they worked on Sims and SimCity 2. So you can imagine when you're looking at place-based decisions or optioneering or building towns and cities with a sustainable and net zero view, that sort of learning is quite important and useful to build in. What we're planning to do is we'll have a minimal viable product of the digital tool by next year. But what we're currently doing is we're building a prototype that we plan to launch at the early part of next year. We are forming a user test group. We have many community energy groups and also local authorities signed up, because we're running basically a design thinking agile sprint. So we keep testing every release. So if you do wish to get involved, I do have an email address at the back of this slide if you haven't already signed up to be part of our testing. Just jumping on to the next slide is just to highlight what local area energy planning sort of customer journey looks like. So we're focusing a lot on finding out what is the journey that's being asked. This has been designed with the local authorities and community energy groups involved in the workshops from March up to date. And really we see it following around sort of 8 key steps, and we've got some fun comic strip icons here just to bring that to life. First is increasing awareness around local area energy planning. Certainly in the 13 regional engagement sessions that we ran this year, the third series that we've run since 2019, is local area energy planning is still a new term for some stakeholder groups, and understanding what is the benefit. We're also looking at that sort of preparation, that stage 2, we're very much focusing around that data, open energy data piece, because the key ask was around when people begin their preparation, they need to start from data, and they're having to do a lot of corralling. So actually having a dedicated open energy data page will make that earlier planning stages much more efficient. Then moving through to steps 3 to 5, that's where the leads in the local energy planning process is really bringing that data together, starting to look at that scenario-based approach of decarbonising the area that they're looking at. And that's where we see the digital tool through Project Clio supporting that exercise, if that's something that our stakeholders would like to use. And then ultimately through stages 6 to 8, that's where when the local area defines the particular pathway that they're looking towards, we can then understand the what, where and when, and we can ensure that's built into our forecasts where there's good confidence and maturity, and we can ensure that capacity access is given at the right time and at the lowest cost. So how that works in terms of local plans being built into network investment, if we jump to the next slide.
And 5 minutes, Lynn.
No, thank you very much. It really starts from the conversation around the distributed future energy scenarios. If you've not come across this, each network operator across the UK shares a distributed future energy scenario. What that sets out is at a more local level, and for UKPR networks we go down to lower layer super output area, and you can also track against different local authority or combined authority and different layers. It sets out what we forecast the expected uptake of low carbon technologies between now and out to the 2050s. And this ties into the future energy scenarios from National Grid. What that allows us to do is that low carbon technology growth that we set out into the distributed future energy scenarios, that then gets inputted into our strategic systems forecasting, our strategic forecasting system that then also builds out our investment pathway. So really we start the conversation out going, well, look, we forecast this expected growth. Does that reflect your local plans? And that's really where the conversation starts in the local area energy planning process, making sure local plans are reflected in. Just jumping on to the next slide, why that's important is ultimately we want to understand local plans so then we can take those local plans through an assurance process to then do a formal adjustment of our distributed future energy scenarios. This local area energy planning process is UKPR networks. We've tested this out with our regional planning authorities, and 93% agreed with this process, and we've put that forward as part of our business plan proposal. Ultimately, it's a means to do data evidence and confidence building for us to do least regret anticipatory investment. So taking a very simple example, imagine in our distributed future energy scenarios for a local area, our forecast was setting out to 2030 that there was going to be 10,000 electric vehicles. But when we engage with the local partners, they actually highlight that their ambition and plan is double that figure. Therefore, for us to understand going beyond ambition to deliverability, we run a first tier 1 assessment, and that's where we do a public assessment on the documents and go through 6 key themes, which include scope, ambition, funding and deliverability. Once we've gone through that tier 1 initial screening, we then look at tier 2, which is more optioneering and assessments. And just because we're close with time, just jumping to the next slide, how those mechanics will work is these are the 6 themes. You've got ambition there, scope, quality, stakeholder support, governance and funding. So that's where myself and my team were doing an initial assessment using publicly available information, because the ask was us as UKPR Networks to take the initial resource burden due to the resource constraints for some local stakeholders. Once we've run that assessment, we'll identify areas for improving maturity and where we can provide support services. Then jumping to the next slide, looking at tier 2, really what happens next is once we've done that materiality assessment, using the framework available to us as a network operator, if the plans have medium confidence, then we have available uncertainty mechanisms, which is available to every network operator. So it allows us to build in that capacity. If the plan has high confidence, then that can be directly built in our investment plan. But the key message here is that we have a process already set up, a team already here to support, to understand your local plans, ensure that we reflect your local plans into our forecasts, and ultimately ensuring that the network is fit for purpose and we build the capacity against your needs. So just in closing, jumping to the next slide, and we'll go to the final slide, so apologies just with time, is we're here to support, we're here to collaborate and ultimately derive the best value solutions. And I'd actively encourage, if you've got local plans that you'd like to discuss with my team and I, please get in touch, and you can get in touch against our main mailbox, and you will also have my details through this invite. Is if we just jump to the next slide, is the mailbox is leap capital lowercase or capital LAAP@ukprnetworks.co.uk. But we're here to deliver the best value solution and ensure that net zero happens at pace and lowest cost.
Lynn, exactly on time. Thank you very much. An awful lot covered there, reflecting, I think, an awful lot of change in UK power networks in terms of the work that you're doing in this area. One of the things that you talked about is actually the team. And if I remember, the team that you've assembled, that you're now managing, which is interacting with local authorities, that's quite a number of people, isn't it?
Yep, so we'll grow to, certainly at the moment our proposal is to grow to 20 people between now and 2028. But already we've got about 4, and that's just building. So it's continuing to build against needs.
I've certainly been on, I think, 2 of the 3 local area energy plan workshops, which have been really, really interesting. And as you mentioned, you've got some innovative kind of organisations working with you to try and realise that data. One quick thing, and I'm just going to move, and I'll bring our other speakers on board as well. So Mary, Pete and Frank, if you could turn on your cameras and come in for the last 10 minutes, and colleagues on the line, if you've got any questions, fire them into the chat and I'll either bring you in or relate them back. But one of the things I just wanted to kind of talk about and get your view on is, and I think it reflects the work that Lynn's managing at UKPN, is where we will be you know, in 5 years' time. I mean, you're putting all these building blocks in place, Lynn, for this information flows between local generators, local authorities, community groups, and the network. Where would you envisage UKPN's relationship with those organisations to be in 5 years? What will be that change that we'll see?
No, it's a very good question. I think certainly what I'm hearing from our stakeholders is seeing that continued proactive kinship shoulder to shoulder. So my expectation is we already build local plans into our forecast, but if we go into 5 years, we'll be actually at the next price control period, which is Rio ED3, out starting sort of 1st of April 2028. And really what I'd expect is that you have you've got a very clear local area energy planning process where you can see the building blocks that a local authority, community energy groups, they have a direct link and they can see what their plan is sitting into the investment strategies. And then you've got more regional service areas supporting these plans coming to fruition. So I just see it increasingly becoming, the engagement becoming positively more intense and collaborative. And really allowing those plans that go into the next price control period, people can recognise themselves against the investment lines.
Lynn, that's really helpful. Pete and Mary, I mean, I'm, you know, the chair of Community Energy London, and we've got 2 excellent projects, neither of which are in London. So if I can kind of help you kind of throw your mind into the London environment.
I probably should have emphasised that. I mean, we've
Yeah.
been working with Repowering London. We have a project in Rupel Park. I think that was, I mean, that was a really great project. We've learned so much from it because we've been really focusing on trying to engage with what we term the hard to reach, and there's lots of reasons why people are hard to reach. Social isolation, English as a second language. I'm trying to hold down 3 jobs and keep my teenager out of prison and look after granny, and you're coming to talk to me about flexibility. What? You know, there's lots of reasons why people find it difficult to engage. And we do want to extend that, and hopefully with the project that's actually got some storage as well, so we can start playing with that as well. And also kind of probably a little bit at the other end of the spectrum, but up in Walthamstow as well. But I do think there's like huge potential in London that I think is untapped. You've got large numbers of people in a small place. There's so many, you know, there's so many places where, you know, it just desperately needs flexibility. So yeah. I think it's really important to emphasize that, actually, because too many projects seem to imply that community energy is only for rural places, which is absolutely not true.
One thing that I seem to remember Pete mentioned, and I think also Frank mentioned as well, is new build planning issues there as well, and where smart energy can fit into policies there. Do you think that might be a route for bringing in smarter energy communities, Pete, where you have new build developments actually integrating the relevant bits of kits in and the relevant network features that can engage in and then work beyond that to existing communities as well, providing those hubs? Pete, you're on mute, Pete.
Beg your pardon. Yes, definitely. I think the new build offers a way of providing a lot of the infrastructure so that it's ready to go. Both and options for establishing energy service companies for the management of energy services in those new builds. Excellent opportunities. I think that it comes down to construction standards, though, in part, and looking to the local authorities to help support the raising of those construction standards, so we don't have to go back and reinstall stuff 3 years' time at much greater resource and financial cost. Mm-hmm. So I know that a number of the local authorities in London are doing some great work on that, and there are places around the country that are making real progress. So it's not as if there isn't the precedents on this in terms of local planning policies to work on. But yeah, and in terms of linking up with the retrofit, if we can, and existing communities, then clearly there is an evidence base that you can build and experience that you can build from that and share. But I guess from our experience and looking at the flexibility, I think we're at a stage where we're very early in the development of the model and the markets, particularly from a community energy perspective. And I think we're going to need to bring together the sorts of things that Mary's talking about around local energy with the flexibility, and see greater standardization before we can kind of really, as communities, start to really engage with this. So I think this is a question of marking cards and then looking at where can we lobby and where can we put pressure to actually bring forward these things quicker.
Okay, Frank, Mary, hang fire for a second.
Okay.
I'll bring Frank in and bring you back, Mary. And then just to mention, a colleague, Dermot Barnes, has asked a couple of questions in the chat. Dermot, I'll bring you in for to kind of ask your questions. But Frank, just that point about new build and the lobbying bit, then Mary, then afterwards. Frank?
Yeah, no, completely agree with Pete there. It's a big area of to aim for. Obviously, there's targets to increase house building and these mooted investment zones and so on and so forth. So there's lots of change afoot on the planning side in national policy. They have reviewed the national planning policy recently for energy, and that's happened, but there may be wider changes going on, and a future levelling up bill has been proposed to go through Parliament as well. So there's different levers which can be used there.
Okay, Mary?
To say, I mean, I think we've now been approached by 4 different companies looking at doing eco build estates. None of them have come to fruition yet, but I think there needs to be carrot as well as stick. And I think for the kind of people who actually want to do it, and okay, this isn't wimpy, but for the people who actually want to do it, I think there needs to be a proper conversation about, okay, well, what do you need to get this off the ground? I mean, there's problems over leasehold and freehold. It's obviously got a huge bad press. There's issues over, well, if we're going to build this over a 20-year period and expect a 20-year contract, can you tell me that the energy market regulations aren't going to change? Well, no, I can't. So there's, so they're looking at trying to do something innovative in the building market. We all know about it, with huge amounts of uncertainty. So I think there needs to be, for kind of people who really want to do it, there needs to be a sit down and go, right, okay, what do you need to be able to put this into place? Not just kind of let's bash all these house builders, because there are people out there who really do want to do it, but they're fighting an uphill battle as well.
Okay, some good points there. One other obsession of mine, and it's been really great to see UKPN have got a similar obsession, is about the data, the availability of data, the quality and accessibility of data. We have my colleague Tim here, and Tim and I have been doing a kind of hashtag release the data kind of discussion with the GLA for about 2 years now, and we've actually made some traction in the last 6 months, which has been really, really promising. But Dermot, you've put a couple of questions about the accessibility of data and whether or not it's able to be used. Can you just explain, as a practitioner, how you've seen that limit what you can and can't do?
Thanks, Syed. Yeah, so I had a couple of questions in the chat, one of which was focusing on that and just saying that, at a practitioner level, quite a lot of the work we're doing at the moment is trying to advise social landlords on essentially restructuring their tenancy agreements such that when they put new tenants into properties, that there is an open data agreement in there and the tenant signs up to allow energy monitoring. So, when you're doing all kinds of post-occupancy evaluation and you want to see that 100 grand you spent retrofitting that building or whatever it is delivering at the meter, because that's where it matters, what's happening, you need access to that data. And if you've got a knock on, to reflect, Mary's point about trying to speak to tenants who've got, way more important concerns on their agenda, you need automated, remote access to that data, and you need tenants to be comfortable with that. So I'm just, I just wish there was enough momentum in that happening at government level to understand that, Climate Change Act means we have to do this at a building level, at a property level. We can't target retrofit effectively and efficiently by just data modeling. The data modeling just tends to be wrong. All models are wrong, as they say. So it's just a question of, how that can be pulled together. And if anybody has any comments on movement in that direction. Yeah, and the other point I was raising, slightly separate, Syed, you might want to talk about it later, was just, energy source data mapping. So is UKPN and our other organizations essentially putting together information around where there is free heat, excess heat being generated, so that it can be captured and used intelligently.
Okay, the heat one is a very good one, and we'll be turning to that to our next event. So thanks for prepping us up for that one. Very quickly, we're running it against the clock here, but Lynn, just to mention, I mean, as I said, you've put lots of data available there. But the anecdote I always remember is that going to a wedding in Denmark 10 years ago and somebody talking about their new heat pump in their house. How does it operate? How do you interact with it? They don't at all. It does everything very cleverly for them in kind of connecting to the actual network and so on. So yeah, how much do you see this as an issue in terms of making more data available for realizing what UKPN would like to see as part of that longer term vision?
Yeah, I mean, very briefly, just in terms of, I think this always needs to be centrally based around customers and stakeholders. The ask is around open data, and certainly we comply and completely get behind the Energy Data Task Force view of presumed open, because I think that sets the right challenge and value principles. Briefly, on the local area energy planning page, of the 6 themes of open energy data that's been released on that dedicated local area energy planning page, there's 1 specific around heat in buildings, and against that there's 5 use cases. I think clearly, in terms of I think Syed, I've understood correctly around how you get that data to then make the right decisions, but then going beyond the right decisions and supporting households and businesses to then actually make best use. I think certainly that's a sort of considered, coordinated effort, and that's where I think community energy groups have a critical role. There's a lot of good passion. There's already a lot of street by street, home to home engagement through energy efficiency, through renewable generation. So I do see within that sort of supporting householders, particularly those that are in fuel poverty or at the moment facing really difficult challenges. I think community groups working with local authorities and supported by utilities, we should be able to make sure that there's a focus on levelling up and social just transition. So I see this through collaboration, good data to make the right identified place-based decisions, and then thirdly, making sure that we tap into third-party advocates that have also got good experience, like community energy groups, to help that engagement at street level.
Yep, thanks, Lynn. We're over time, but 30 seconds to our remaining 3 speakers, and I'll call it a day. Pete, Mary, Frank, is there anything you want to add to that from that data, that perspective on the user?
I think my plea would always be that, really explain to people why it's a good idea for them to allow you to have their data, and always give them the chance to shut it off. Because otherwise it's seen as Big Brother, particularly I think in sort of social housing stations. You can have a lot of people that they always feel that authority's out to get them. So, if it just becomes like, oh, this is the latest way to check up on us, then it's just going to completely backfire. So there's got to be something in it for people.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of a big plea from my point of view.
Listen, thank you very much to all our speakers. I think we've just barely scratched the surface of what is a kind of really fundamental series of changes to the energy market, both the generation, supply and distribution level, and where community energy fits in there. My view has already been, the reason I spend so much time and effort for this is, as part of the transition, local energy, community energy groups have a fundamental role to play if we're going to successfully transfer as part of the energy transition. We're struggling to find the routes always in London, but it's heartening to see that increasing projects outside of London are making some headway, and we've got things that we need to clearly learn in the capital from there. And organisations like REA are lobbying government in the right direction, and UKPN are standing up and putting their money where their mouth is to actually deliver some of the tools to help us actually enable that change. Thank you very much, all our colleagues. Apologies for running slightly over. Speakers, if I can bother you for another 5 minutes of your time, if you could just stay online, I promise we'll be only 5 minutes. Jess, can you just remind us all when our next event is, please? So the third of the Spotlight events is Decarbonising Heat, which will take place on the...
And that's Tuesday, the 29th of November, same time as today, 10 till 12.
Great, and we'll be exactly answering Dermot's questions. Dermot, don't stay online till then, but just kind of sign in on the 29th. Okay, thank you to everybody else. I'd grateful if you could go away and make yourself a cup of tea and have some lunch. And our speakers, I'll bother you for another 5 minutes, but do please come along to further Community Energy London events. They're all posted on our website, communityenergy.london. Thank you again. Okay, speakers, I've said we're 5 minutes over. Thanks for staying there. That's been really, really helpful. Just any, basically, I'm trying to keep you back so you can give me some tips on what you think Community London should better be doing. And Lynn, you probably got a feel for that working across the different territories. What more would you like to see actually from CEL and its members in terms of engagement on either the local area energy plans or anything else? And I'll just extend it out to